the sound of wind howling across the rooftops. The rain has stopped, but the city remains soaked, its streets slick and reflective. A slow, eerie melody plays in the background, building tension. Detective Ethan Graves had spent years chasing ghosts through the darkened streets of the city, but none had been as elusive as Mr. H. With Kincaid in custody, Graves had come closer to uncovering the truth than anyone ever had. But the deeper he dug, the more dangerous the game became. Now the shadows were closing in, and the hand pulling the strings was about to make its move. The sound of a phone ringing cuts through the air. Graves answers quickly. Police station, morning. The hum of the police station fills the earphones ringing, faint voices in the background. Graves is standing in his office, phone pressed to his ear, his voice implied through the narrator. The call was from Charlie, and it wasn't good. Harrison had gone completely off the radar. Since the confrontation in the abandoned building, he had vanished without a trace. But there was more. Someone had been watching Graves' apartment, his office, even his phone calls. He had known he was under surveillance, but this time it was different. The watchers weren't just gathering information, they were preparing to strike. Graves sets the phone down, his footsteps quickening as he heads out of the office. Graves could feel the pressure mounting. The walls were closing in, and every move he made felt like a step deeper into enemy territory. But he wasn't going to back down, not now. Not when he was so close. The sound of his footsteps echo through the hallway as he leaves the station. Graves' apartment, afternoon. The sound of a key turning in the lock, the door creaking open. Graves steps inside, his senses on high alert. The faint hum of the city outside seeps in through the windows. Graves had come home to find everything exactly as he left it. But something felt wrong off. It was a feeling he couldn't shake, like a presence lingering just beyond his reach. The sound of quiet footsteps as Graves moves cautiously through the apartment. The sound of a chair scraping across the floor. Then he saw it, a small black device, tucked neatly under his desk. A listening device. Graves had been right. Someone had been in his apartment, watching, waiting. The discovery sent a chill down his spine. They were closer than he had realized. The sound of Graves removing the device, his breathing steady but tense. The faint ticking of a clock echoes in the background. Graves knew what this meant. The people hunting him weren't playing around anymore. They were preparing for the endgame. And now, it was only a matter of time before they made their move. Graves drops the device into a small evidence bag, his footsteps echoing as he leaves the apartment, closing the door behind him. Interrogation room, evening. The sound of a heavy door creaking open. The room is quiet, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead. Kincaid sits calmly in the interrogation room, his hands cuffed to the table. Graves steps inside, his footsteps deliberate, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. Kincaid hadn't said much since his arrest. He had been cool, composed, almost smug, as if he were waiting for something. But Graves wasn't interested in waiting anymore. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Graves pulls a chair out and sits across from Kincaid, the tension thick between them. Graves leaned in, his eyes locked on Kincaid's. "Where's Harrison?" Graves demanded, his voice steady but forceful. Kincaid's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something Graves hadn't seen before. Fear. A moment of silence. The ticking of the clock in the background grows louder. "You still don't get it, do you?" Kincaid said, his voice low but taunting. "Harrison isn't the one you should be worried about. Mister, he's everywhere. He's been watching you since the beginning." Graves clenches his fists, but his voice remains calm. Graves knew Kincaid was trying to rattle him, but the truth was, it was working. Mr. H was always one step ahead, always in control. But this time, Graves wasn't going to let him slip away. Graves stands up, his chair scraping the floor as he pushes it back. Graves leaned over the table, his voice low and dangerous. "You're going to tell me where to find him, Kincaid, or I'll make sure you go down for everything, every body, every cover-up, every crime he's committed. You'll take the fall for all of it." The sound of Kincaid shifting in his seat, his calm demeanor faltering for the first time. Kincaid hesitated, his eyes narrowing as he weighed his options. Then finally he spoke. "There's a meeting tonight," he said. "The old Pier 17. Harrison will be there. So will Mr. H, but if you go, Graves, you won't make it out alive." Graves doesn't respond, his footsteps echoing as he leaves the room. The door closes behind him with a soft click. Pier 17, night. The sound of waves crashing softly against the wooden pier. The wind whistles through the abandoned docks, and the faint creak of old wood adds to the eerie atmosphere. Graves' footsteps are slow and cautious as he moves through the shadows. Pier 17 had once been a hub of activity, but now it was little more than a forgotten relic of the past, quiet, abandoned, and shrouded in darkness. Graves moved carefully, his senses heightened. This was it, the meeting place. The place where it would all go down. The sound of muffled voices up ahead, faint but growing louder. Graves stops, listening closely. He heard them before he saw them, Harrison, and another man whose voice Graves didn't recognize. It had to be Mr. H. Graves edged closer, staying in the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest. This was his chance, his only chance to finally bring Mr. H into the light. The sound of quiet conversation filters through the air, indistinct but tense. Graves takes a slow breath, steadying himself. But just as Graves was about to step forward, he felt a presence behind him. The barrel of a gun pressed against his back, and a low, gravelly voice whispered in his ear. "I told you, Graves. You shouldn't have come." The sound of Graves breathing heavily, the tension building as the man, likely one of Kincaid's men, tightens his grip on the gun. Graves had known it was a trap, but now he was caught in it, and there was no easy way out. He could feel the pressure of the gun against his spine, the cold steel pressing into him like a knife's edge. The sound of footsteps approaching from behind, the voice of Mr. H, is heard faintly now, calm and collected. Then, a voice broke the silence. "Let him go," it said, cool and confident. Graves felt the gun lower, and the man behind him stepped away. For the first time, Graves turned to see the face of the man he had been chasing for so long. A pause, the sound of the wind howling across the pier. Mr. H stood before him, a man who looked nothing like the shadowy figure Graves had imagined. He was calm, composed, almost casual, but there was an unmistakable air of danger about him. "You've been very persistent, Detective," Mr. Ash said, his voice smooth and mocking. "But I'm afraid this is where your chase ends." Graves doesn't respond immediately, but his hand tightens around the grip of his gun. Mr. H smiled, a cold, calculated smile that sent a chill down Graves' spine. "You've been looking for me, Graves," he said. "But you never stop to ask yourself why." The sound of the waves crashing grows louder as the tension between them thickens. Graves stepped forward, his voice steady. "I'm not here for answers, Mr. H. I'm here for justice." But Mr. H only laughed, a quiet, sinister sound that echoed across the pier. The wind howls again, the sound of footsteps approaching quickly. "Justice," Mr. H repeated, his voice dripping with amusement. "There is no justice, Graves. Only power. And the power in this city belongs to me." Graves remained silent, his gun still drawn, but the situation is slipping out of his control. The conversation was over. Graves knew it, and so did Mr. H, The man turned, walking away into the shadows as his men closed in on Graves, their weapons raised. The sound of guns being cocked, footsteps moving in closer. Graves stands his ground. But Graves wasn't about to back down. Not now, not after everything he had been through. He took a deep breath, his finger tightening on the trigger. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. The sound of a gunshot rings out, loud and sharp. The scene cuts to black, the sound of waves crashing and the wind howling as the episode fades out. The sound of typing returns, rhythmic and deliberate. A phone rings faintly in the background. In a dark room, far from the chaos of the pier, the game continued. Messages were sent, orders given. Graves is in play, the message read. Proceed with the next phase. The sound of typing stops, the faint sound of rain returns. Graves had come face to face with Mr. H, but the game was far from over. The final move was being prepared, and the stakes had never been higher. The shadows were closing in, and only one player would walk away. Next time, on Silent Shadows,